ברוך אתה אדוני, אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר קידשנו במצוותיו וציוונו לעסוק בדברי תורה. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandment, has commanded us to be engaged with the words of the Torah. O Lord our God, we ask that you make the words of your Torah sweet in our mouths, and in the mouth of the entire people, the greater house of Israel. May we, our descendant, and the descendant of your people of the greater house of Israel, know your name and study your Torah for its own sake. Blessed are you, O Lord, who teaches Torah to his people. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who chose us from all people to give us his Torah. Blessed are you, O Lord, who gives us the Torah. So tonight actually, starts Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av means the 9th of Av. It's a date in the Hebrew calendar. We talked about it every year at this time. It's a dismal date in the Hebrew calendar that started with when the spies in the desert did not want to conquer the land, and they were punished with 40 years of wandering in the desert until their whole generation was gone. It's also the date of the burning of the first temple by the Babylonian army, the burning of the second temple by the Roman army. It's a date that leads back to some crusade, to the Inquisition, to the beginning of World War I, which was the prelude of World War II and the Holocaust. And there are other things. There are many things you can, if you look on Wikipedia, there's a lot of stuff there. So it's a dismal date. So I wanted to address it a little bit today. Because actually the Torah portion, the section that we read this week, starts with Moshe reminding his people of Tisha B'Av. In the beginning of Deuteronomy, he talks about how the previous generation failed to enter the land. And that's really the prelude to the date of Tisha B'Av. Here we have, here's what's going on. Moses arrived with that second generation of children of Israel. All these people, except for a few, the great majority of the people who were there were desert born. The most of them did not see the miracles in Egypt. For them, it was stories. And so the book of Deuteronomy, the word Deuteronomy means the second giving of the Torah. Because before entering, they were getting ready to enter the land. And before entering, he was going to recapitulate everything. Probably, can you imagine? Over 2 million people in there. The stories that must have gone on. Some true, some less true, some exaggerated, some minimized. It's not like they had YouTube or the internet. Everything was by word of mouth. So he was going to recapitulate while we're here. Where are we going? What happened? Why do we have this big thing that we carry? In Book of Deuteronomy, he explains everything. He also, as his pep talk before entering the land, he explains to them how when the children of Israel repented from not wanting to conquer the land, they decided to go fight, and they had an humiliating defeat, thus showing them that victory was not ensured unto them just because they were God's spoiled brat or they were strong or whatever. but just because victory is ensured unto us when we are in the will of the Lord. And that's a true lesson that goes for his children today. We are victorious when we are in his will and obedient. At the Torah Club, we've been going on for a few weeks now, and there's a bit more to go. We've been talking a lot about the time of the Passion and the crucifixion, the suffering of the Master during the crucifixion. Where is that? I just want to. I don't want it to go to sleep. So, and I think it's quite appropriate that we come to such a part in our Bible study, a part that is dismal, a part that is sad. At the time we arrive at the remembrance of Tisha B'Av and the destruction of the temple. I think the crucifixion. Is a prelude to the destruction of the temple 40 years later. So there's a lot that we can learn in it. The crucifixion of Yeshua is actually the event that will provoke the destruction of the second temple on Tisha B'Av. This time for the Master was a time of intense suffering of the kind that the whole city of Jerusalem and Israel will eventually suffer 40 years later. So he, as a good leader, he led the way. He led the way. And if you want to have an idea, I mean, the text of the Torah Club this week goes into a little bit of details, and it's pretty raw. Or if you ever watched the movie The Passion, that's pretty raw too. And in the movie The Passion, there's a point where I know when I watched it, there's a point you don't want to watch anymore. Because you feel, no, but I do believe it was realistic. If you go through the details of what he went through, it was realistic. But so, and if you remember, at the time of the crucifixion, there was a moment where the Roman soldier that was there wanted to give something. Yeshua said, "I'm thirsty." He wanted to give him something to drink, and some record says vinegar and myrrh, vinegar and myrrh. Others say vinegar and frankincense. Others say, but there is a historical records that show that sometime people gave something mixed with frankincense to people who were in intense suffering, because it had a bit of an analgesic effect. It was a sort of a painkiller to a certain extent. And Yeshua refused to drink it. So two reasons are given for that. One, he had said at the time of the Passover, he will not drink any more of the fruit of the vine until he drinks it with her at the banquet. Well, vinegar is the fruit of the vine. So I don't think it was rice vinegar or apple vinegar. So it was wine vinegar, grape vinegar. That's one of the reasons, possibly. Another reason is that he did not want to lessen the suffering that he was going through as an atonement for our sin. He didn't want to lessen it. I think it's quite a remarkable statement. We have another one like that in the book of Hebrews, somewhere in there. It's in Hebrews 11. In Hebrews 11, the writer speaks of those people who are martyrs for the faith. And at one point, he talks about people being tortured for the sake of the word of God. And he says, being tortured and refusing deliverance that they may obtain a better resurrection. And we talked about what is better resurrection, what it looks like. You know, it's like they would have had a chance to get some sort of deliverance, I don't know, but they refused it. So it's very possible that Yeshua refused that drink because he didn't want the analgesic. I don't know. Maybe both reasons are valid. But as we talk about, it is good to talk about the suffering of Yeshua at the time of the destruction of and the siege of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple. So some of this suffering, atoning suffering, is described in Isaiah 53, which we all know. It's actually the passage that someone used to bring me to faith and belief that Yeshua is the Son of God, the Messiah, by whom we're all redeemed. But Isaiah 53 is not a standalone prophecy. It's very important when we read the Bible that we never, ever read a verse on its own, because context changes everything. You can read a passage of a story that says, and he said, I love you. First of all, who is he? To who was he talking to? To his mom? To his girlfriend? What's the context? Was it something he'd been trying to say for a long time but could not say it? So I should really read it with, and he said, I love, you know, how am I going to read it if I don't read it right, understand it right, if I don't know the story? Context changes everything. So when we read a passage, a verse, we've got to go a little bit before, a little bit after, to check it. Go away. To check out what's going on. So, and even it's the same with the chapter. The chapter very often doesn't stand on its own. A lot of verses start with, and he said, oh, when it starts with and, maybe we need to go back a little bit before to check. And sometimes the context of to find out the context of the chapter, you've got to go back several chapters. You know, it's like or sometime in a text you'll find, and Moses stood up because he was sitting down because he had a broken leg, blah, 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 and you go down. And then the story continues 5 verses later. You have to really follow the trend of the text. So the prophecy of Isaiah 53 is actually part of a greater oracle that actually starts at Isaiah 40. It's called Deutero-Isaiah, the second Isaiah. And it's called the servant prophecies. And the servant prophecy has a lot of stuff. And yes, it's about Yeshua and it's about Israel. So, and today, if you ask uh, modern Jewish person who knows the Torah, who knows the Tanakh, who knows the Old Testament, what is Isaiah 53 and the servant prophecy about, he'll tell you, oh, it's about Israel. If you ask a Christian, he'll tell you, no, it's about Yeshua. The thing is, it's about both. It's about both. And it becomes much clearer when you read it in Hebrew. Because, for example, in English, we have you, which is masculine, feminine, singular, plural. You know, you went, who went? You know, you rebelled, who rebelled? You will do this, who? It's all very, but in Hebrew, you have a you for singular, a you for feminine, a you for masculine singular, a you for masculine plural, a you for feminine singular, a you for even the verbs change. So you can see that sometimes it addresses in the plural, sometimes it addresses in the singular. Or sometimes there is he, or so sometimes there is they. And Isaiah 53 is singular. Now, Jewish people in the days of Yeshua believed that Isaiah 53 was about Yeshua. I know that because Peter uses it when he, after Acts 2, he witnesses to people and he uses that verse. And I think he knows what he was talking about. He had met the resurrected Messiah. You know, so it's afterward that things change. So and another reason why I feel like it's important to talk about the time of the destruction of the temple is because even a cursory study of the political and social situation of Israel, especially Jerusalem, Israel in those days, when you study it, you feel you could be talking about today. It sounds so similar to a lot of things that we see happening today. In the days of Yeshua, religion had been hijacked by increasing religious fanaticism mixed with nationalism, mixed with violent nationalism. And when religion merges with violent fanaticism and nationalism, it is not pretty. It is not pretty. And it happens. I've seen it happening not just with Christianity, but with Judaism, with Hinduism. I was in India. With Buddhism. It's not pretty. And I think this time serves as a warning for us upon whom the times of the end has come. Also, the times of the crucifixion of Yeshua were actually critical historical moments of prophetic juncture. God had decided that that time should be when the Messiah should come. So that time was very important. And what Yeshua said, you did not recognize the time of your visitation, so your house will be taken away from you. Oh. You know, many people nowadays believe that we're approaching some sort of end time type of scenario. You know, who knows what could be happening. We need to also be able to recognize the time of our visitation in our days. And we have the benefit of past history to look into. So, whoa, they didn't have that. We do. Even Paul in 1 Corinthians 10, twice he says, these things happened to them as a uh, as an example. Thank you for us upon who the ends of the end of the age has come. So it was already an example for them in the time of Paul, and he was talking about children of Israel in the desert. So if it was already an example for the people in Corinth 2,000 years ago, how much is it for us? So today I wanted to spend some time talking and reflecting about some of the events, some of the things that happened, the events surrounding the destruction of the Second Temple. And what I will do, I will read you some stories that come from the book called Chronicles of the Apostles, and I'll even show you a little movie clip. How is that? So, Yeshua had said, I'll tell you if I can read my writing. He had warned the disciples, saying that when armies surround Jerusalem, he said, flee. He really gave them specific instructions. It's all in Matthew 24 and I think Luke 21. What happened is that it was Yeshua had come to Jerusalem on the donkey. Everybody claimed him King of Israel, Messiah, and 4 days later he was going to be crucified. But he spent these 4 days teaching in the temple. And it says in Matthew 24 at the end of the day they would go and sleep in Mount of Olives. They had a little place there. And it was common for people to sleep outside, especially people who came as pilgrims for the holidays. It was like, it's not that they were homeless, it's just, but Yeshua was homeless. He didn't have more homeless than foxes. And so as they were going to the Mount of Olives, they were on an elevation, and they started looking at the buildings. I mean, Herod's temple was beautiful. Even the Pharisees who hated Herod said that whoever hasn't seen Herod's temple has never seen a beautiful building. It was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It was like he was a rotten king, but a great architect. So the disciples, they look and they say, look, they're doing, it's like, going to Washington, D.C. and you go see what's going on. They're from Galilee. They're farmers, fishermen, and they're in the big city, Jerusalem. They say to Yeshua, hey, look, that's so beautiful. He said, oh, yeah, nothing's going to stand. Not one stone is going to stay. The disciples understood. They were educated of some sort because they made the connection. Temple destroyed, end of the age, establishment of the kingdom of God by Messiah. Okay. So right away, the next question that they asked, that shows that they knew their Talmud, they knew their eschatology, they knew their biblical history, past, present, and future. So the next question they asked was, what shall be the sign for these things to happen? And of the day of your coming. They equated destruction of the temple, the establishment of the kingdom of God by the Messiah. Okay, they made the equation. And Yeshua proceeded to give them a lot of signs. Pestilences, earthquakes, false prophets, wars, rumors of wars, all this stuff. But then he says, but when you see these things, Don't worry. It's not the end yet. I always think it's funny that when people see these things, they worry. They say, oh, it's the end time. He says, no, when you see these things, that means it's not the end. So don't worry, don't fret. I always give the sample of the woman in labor. A first-time mother, she has a baby, and at 6.5 months, she starts a little bit of contraction. She runs to the hospital because she doesn't know what's going on. She's afraid. She's fretting. But a veteran mother who's had 5 or 6 kids, she's like, oh, okay. Well, she'd sit down, have a glass of water, and wait till it's over. And Yeshua, he's saying to them, he says, when you see all this stuff, the war, don't worry, it's only the beginning of labor. You sit down, take a glass of water, wait. It's not yet the time to deliver the baby. And so you wait. You're on watch. You're not on alert. You're on watch. I remember with my wife, it was at first, first babies, it's like false alarm, so many times. But I learned the trick, especially when we used to live in Switzerland, in a place where she was going to have Pavel. It was January on the mountains in Switzerland. To go out in the middle of the night means get out of the warm bed, take the ice off the windshield, and big trip. So I learned with my wife, he said, if she wakes me up and goes, well, it might be, I said, oh, I go back to sleep. But when she wakes me up and she's dressed, she's got her purse and she's ready, let's go. I know she's serious, then we go. We got to recognize the watch and the emergency, So he talks that some of the thing would be false prophets. One of the signs. There's always been false prophets. We read about Korah. Korah was a false prophet. False prophet is the plague, But, I always try to look at the good. And there is a benefit to false prophets. If you know how to recognize it, a false prophet forces you to be more diligent in defining the right one, in finding the right one. It exposes all the tricks that you can counterfeit a prophet, all the counterfeiting tricks. We have to, it gives us intelligence about it. So Yeshua told them, when you see these things, don't fret. But then he says, when you see the abomination of desolation, that's Matthew 24:15, spoken of by the prophet Daniel, then flee. That's the one sign. And then he also said, when you see Jerusalem surrounded with armies, then go. So there was this prophecy among the believers that when Jerusalem is surrounded with armies, to just leave. And there was the next guy who was the leader of the congregation after Yeshua was James, his brother. And then the next guy was Simon, which was a cousin. It all stayed within the family because it had to. So, and he's the one who saw that sign. He first saw it in the clouds. And he's, but then he was not going to go into something ethereal and tell everybody to leave. But when the actual armies of Rome came, then he told the congregation to leave. And you can read about that story. You can read it in Wikipedia. You type flight to Pella. It's a place where they went. I've gone also to Petra also. Pella is further than Petra. So But some false prophets rose at that time who told people to gather in the temple. The Romans did not want to burn the temple. But some false prophet told people, gather in the temple, they will never dare. Uh-oh. So I want to read about a couple of these. So there was false prophets, but of course there was always the good prophet. And whether in the days of Jeremiah or Moses or Yeshua, the good prophets were few and far between. The true prophet always stood aside from the majority. He was the lone voice in the desert. While everybody was saying, go fight, you will win. He says, like Jeremiah says, no. God says, you're not going to win. It's my punishment. Put your neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon, then you will live. Surrender. Oh, can you imagine somebody going to the armies and saying that? They're going to put him in jail, and they did put him in jail. But the true prophets very often stands aside from the crowd, stand alone from the crowd. As in the days of Jeremiah and others, many false prophets who are either mostly politically motivated, support war and victory, that God will help them, but they are wrong. True prophets usually stand alone against a hyped up crowd. So I'm going to read about a couple of those, okay? And these are true stories that come from, mostly a lot of it comes from the writings of Josephus. So we're having story time today. First is about the state of the famine in Jerusalem. Our master said, Mark 3:25, if a house is divided against itself, that house will not be able to stand. We all know that verse, right? The civil war inside Jerusalem's walls split into 3 parties. Jerusalem didn't need the Romans to destroy it. It was destroying itself because of political zealotry, because of a civil war between extremists, fundamentalist extremists. They're called zealots. The civil war inside Jerusalem was split into 3 parties. Simon, son of Jorah, ruled the city. The zealot bandit, John of Gichala, held the outer courts of the temple on the Temple Mount. And the zealot faction under Eleazar, the son of Simon, took control of the temple itself and sealed themselves inside the inner court. I think this Eleazar is a guy who ended up in Masada. The 3 factions made war on each other. Instead of uniting to fight the Romans, they made war on each other. Duh. Simon, son of Jorah's men, attacked the Temple Mount to try to dislodge John from Gishala's men. So we might think, oh, this is so ridiculous. What they did, the rationale behind that was very simple. You are bad, so the curse of God in the siege of Rome is because of you. So I'm going to get rid of you, and watch, it's going to stop. That's really the rationale. You have a bad political agenda. You have a bad lifestyle. You caused the curse of God to come on the country, so I'm going to destroy you to bring back God's blessing. That's the rationale. If we put it that way, we can see something very common throughout history. So John's men sent raids into the city against Simon's men. At the same time, they fought against Eleazar's men for the control of the temple. During the course of the daily skirmishes, John's men set fire to the warehouse grains controlled by Simon. Now, people like Nicodemus who was a believer, chose not to leave Jerusalem at the time of the siege. Both him and Joseph of Arimathea were very, very, very rich. Between them and other people, probably, they had established enough grain, enough supplies for the city to withstand maybe a 20-year stand. The Romans would have run out before they would. But during a skirmish between the zealot factions, the supply warehouse got burnt. It's like, what a sad story. With friends like those, who needs enemies? And then there is some anecdotes. The Talmud says that in those days, a wealthy Sadducean woman named Martha from the house of Boethius sent her servant out to the market, saying, "Go buy me some fine flour." By the time he reached the marketplace, the merchants had no fine flour left. He walked back to her mansion and said, "The fine flour is gone, but there's white flour." She said, "Go buy some white flour." By the time he reached the marketplace, the white flour was gone. He came and told her, "The white flour is gone, but there is dark flour," she said to him, going down in quality, right? So she said to him, "Go buy me dark flour." By the time he reached the marketplace, even the dark flour was gone. He returned and said to her, "The dark flour is gone, but there is barley flour." She said, "Go buy me barley flour." By the time he reached the marketplace, even the barley flour was gone, which was the lowest quality. The famine grew severe. The people searched the city for any food supplies. The wealthy of Jerusalem had plenty of silver and gold, but they could not eat it. When Martha was about to die, she brought out all of her gold and silver and threw it on the street. She said, "What good is any of this? Can any of this do to me now?" I think there was a starting also of cannibalism. So when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, that was a good prophet. There is probability that he knew Yeshua, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. When he heard about this, he said, "Now I know what the prophet says in Ezekiel 7:19. They will fling their silver into the street, and their gold will become an abhorrent thing. Their silver and their gold will not be able to deliver them in the day of the wrath of the Lord." So he brought a Ezekiel prophecy. This rabbi is the one who, before the destruction of the temple, there were some things that happened in the temple that were very unusual. Usually at Yom Kippur, they put a wool dyed red on the door of the temple. And that wool dyed red become white after Yom Kippur. For the last 40 years, it did not. And one of the reasons why it's a miracle is because you cannot make white again wool that has been dyed red. So that was a miracle. But for the last 40 years, between the crucifixion and resurrection and the capture of Jerusalem, it didn't happen. And the doors of the temple used to open by themselves. This is not like a little door. It's like it took several people to push it open. And some prophets would say, "Yes, it's because the word of the Lord is going to everybody, blah, blah, blah." And Yochanan ben Zakkai said, this is a bad omen. And he was predicting the destruction of the temple because of that. And he was right. So when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai heard about this famine and the way it was, he said, I already read that. The Pharisees and sages connected with the school of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, that the war who knew that the war would end in disaster. People were stopping their positive prophecy. They were starting to say, like the disciples of Yeshua, they had foreseen the school of this rabbi, they had foreseen the inevitable end. In the year that our master died, Rabbi Tzadok undertook a series of regular fasts while he prayed that Jerusalem may not be destroyed. He subsisted on sparse diet of figs and became so emaciated that whenever he ate anything, the food could be seen passing through his throat. So he was fasting a long fast. And of course, if you fast a long fast with absolutely nothing, you die. So to do that, you do have a little bit of food to just keep you barely going. When Vespasian's forces drew near Jerusalem, the rabbis associated with Yochanan ben Zakkai despaired and said to the zealot, "Let us go out to the Romans and make peace with them." So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was a lone voice in the desert, now people were coming to him. Well, we see that thing again, the lone voice was the right one. The zealots replied, "On the contrary, let us go out and fight against them." So they wanted to go out and negotiate with the Romans. But the zealots said, nobody goes out. And they actually would kill people who tried to leave Jerusalem. The rabbi told the zealots, "You will not succeed." It so happened that Ben Battaya, a leader of Sikari zealot, was the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's sister. So he had a nephew that was a zealot. The people called him Abba Sikra, Father Sikari, and Sikari comes from the knife that those zealots used. They were a bit bent like this, so that they could go like this straight to the heart from under the sternum. And that's actually where we get the name Judas Iscariot. That's where his name comes from. He was a zealot. So when Yohanan ben Zakkai heard that Abba Sikra set fire to the grain supply, he cried out, "Whoa!" In Hebrew, you say "whoa," you say "oi," "oi vayvoy." "Oi vayvoy" is added Yiddish stuff, but "oi" itself is a Hebrew word. So you say "oi." Abba Sikra heard about it and demanded, "Why did you cry out "oi" when I fired the granaries?" Yochanan ben Zakkai explained, "I did not say "oi." I said "wow." I don't know. A few days later, Ben Zakkai observed people in the market boiling straw and drinking the broth. He said to himself, "Can people who boil straw and drink its broth withstand the armies of Vespasian? I must leave the city." How is he going to do that? He sent a message to Abba Sikra saying, "Come visit me privately." The old sage asked his young revolutionary nephew, "How long are you zealots going to carry on like this? You will kill the people with starvation." Abba Sikra replied, "What can I do about it? If I say one word to them, they'll kill me." Ben Zakkai said, "At least devise some plan to help me escape the city." Sikra said, "We have agreed that no one will leave except for corpses." Ben Zakkai replied, "Okay, get me out as a corpse then." They concocted an escape plan. Abba Sikra said, "Feign illness. Let everyone come to inquire about your health. Bring some putrid smelling thing and put it in your bed so that they will think that you're already dead. Let your most trusted disciples place you on a bier, B-I-E-R, not B-E-E-R, and carry you out for burial." Ben Zakkai agreed to the ruse. His disciples, Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananiah and Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, carried their teacher's bier to the city gate. The zealots guarding the gate suspected mischief, and one of them was about to thrust his lance through the bier and make sure that the old rabbi was really dead. But Eliezer protested. He said, "Shall they say, 'Oh, they have pierced their master'? Oh, you can't do that. Bad optics." The zealots wanted to throw the bier to the ground, but Rabbi Joshua protested, "Shall they say they have thrown down their master? Bad optics." The zealots finally opened the gate, and Joshua and Eliezer carried their master out. Clear of the city, they fled to the Romans. He had a resurrection. Ben Zakkai appeared before Vespasian and saluted him, saying, "Peace unto you, O king! Peace unto you, O king!" Ooh, Vespasian was not a king. Vespasian replied, "You deserve to die twice. First, because you call me a king and I'm not a king. And that's actually treachery to Caesar, to declare oneself king. Secondly, because if you really think that I'm king, why did you not surrender yourself earlier?" That was a bad beginning of a meeting. Ben Zakkai replied, "As for your saying that you are not king, in truth you must be a king, because if you were not king, Jerusalem would not be delivered into your hand. For it is written in Isaiah 10:34, and Lebanon will fall by the mighty one." Mighty one means king. Lebanon means temple, as it says in the Torah in Deuteronomy 3:25. The temple was made of cedar of Lebanon, so it was often referred to in text as Lebanon. So Yohanan ben Zakkai was this lone voice that knew the temple was going to fall, that Jerusalem was going to fall, because of a prophecy. He was not listening to the political hypes of the day. He was listening to the word. And so he says, "That good mountain of Lebanon, as for why I didn't surrender earlier," he says, "the bandits inside the city told me not to leave." Vespasian expressed skepticism. But just then, a messenger came saying, "Rise up, the Emperor Otto is dead, and the prominent men of Rome have chosen you as head." Right while they were talking, he was made king. Vespasian was amazed that Yohanan ben Zakkai seemed to have known this news before he himself did. This tells us like a little bit like Daniel, who knew the prophecy of the king, Joseph, who knew the prophecy of Pharaoh. The gift of discernment and prophecy is very important for kings and rulers. So he said to the old rabbi, "Okay, I'll give you one request." He wanted to reward him. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made 4 requests. Lesson: if you're going to give one request to a Jew, no, you're going to get 4, or to a rabbi. Vespasian granted the boon. He said yes to all 4. And Yochanan established an academy for the sages in Yavne, which is north of Israel, where they reconstructed Jerusalem, Judaism for export during diaspora. And after the destruction of Jerusalem, Yochanan ben Zakkai gathered the remaining sages and scholars to the city of Yavne and began a new Sanhedrin. So, isn't that interesting? So here is a true prophet who stood and was vindicated. There is another one. His name is Joshua ben Hananiah. And this is all from the book Josephus' Jewish Wars. For the last 7.5 years, the people of Jerusalem had become accustomed to the mournful voice of Yeshua ben Hananiah. The name Yeshua, Jesus, was very common. The mysterious prophet who began his sad lament in the year that James, the brother of the Master, died. We can read that in the book of Acts. At Sukkot of 62 CE, Yeshua ben Hananiah began a tireless routine of wandering the streets of Jerusalem and walking the circumference of its walls, crying out, "A voice from the east, a voice from the west, a voice from the four winds, a voice against Jerusalem and the holy house, a voice against the bridegroom and the bride, a voice against this whole people." The Sadducean leaders and chief priests arrested him and flogged him for disturbing the peace. The Roman procurator Albinus had him scourged. Nothing availed. Hear that lone voice again. And shh, don't be talking doom. We're business to take care of. As soon as they released him, the man resumed his gloomy lament. For 7.5 years he lived as a homeless man, circling about the city, always crying out, "Woe, woe to Jerusalem!" At festival times his cry grew louder. During the week of unleavened bread in 70 AD, the 10th legion hurled their stones against Jerusalem. The prophet Yeshua paced the circumference of the city atop the city walls, heedless of the danger, calling out louder than ever day after day, "Woe, woe to the city again, and to the people, and to the holy house." He was prophesying that you're done. One day he abruptly stopped, lifted up his voice, and cried out, "Woe, woe, woe to myself also." Just then one of the great stones hurled from the siege engines and came sailing through the air and struck him dead, and he gave us his spirit. He gave up his spirit. So again, we have these voices, and we need to identify the voices. It's important to identify the voices, and I think 2 years ago, I think I gave a teaching on the voice of God, how to identify the voice of prophecy. And one of the litmus tests, the voice of litmus test, is the fruits of the Spirit. That's one of them. But also, it's the Beatitude, what's called the Beatitude, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Yeshua, he taught us how to react to enmity, how to react to poverty, how to react to injustice, how to react to all these things. He taught us to do that in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And there's much more, but there is a big chunk of it there. In my humble opinion, anything that doesn't fit a template of what he said should be really doubted. The template that he gave is still valid today. It's still our template. He said, "Blessed are the merciful, they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the peacemaker. You're blessed when you suffer injustice." This is the template, as far as I'm concerned. This is the template of the voice of God for today. It's that class is on my YouTube channel still. Okay, let's see. I have a little more than we'll have a video. Is this interesting? Here there is one called sabotage. You'll see it on that video I'm going to show, and also you can see a lot of it. If you haven't watched the Dove Keepers, it's about Josephus and Masada. It's very nice to watch. It's a good movie. I actually have a copy of it. You can even borrow if you want. Here, this is from Jewish Wars again. It took the legions 17 days of continuous labor to raise the 4 siege ramps and finish construction of the enormous siege towers. Jerusalem had 3 walls, and it was really tough to conquer. So they made ramps, but of course, while they make ramps, they're under fire. So it took the legion 17 days of continuous labor to raise the 4 siege ramps and finish. It doesn't sound like much, 17 days. the finished construction of the enormous siege towers. They must have depleted the whole area of trees. During those 17 days, the zealots had not been idle. John of Gishala ordered his men to tunnel beneath the wall of the fortress and undermine the entire siege platform. His men created massive caverns beneath the earth directly beneath the ramps. They supported the weight of the ceiling with cedar beams, which they covered with flammable pitch and bitumen. As the Romans began to haul their siege engines up to the tower, the zealots filled the cavern with incendiary material and ignited a blaze. The oxygen-starved fire smoldered away the support beams. All at once, the ground beneath the siege platforms collapsed. The enormous siege towers twisted and fell into a heap of lumber. Thick plumes of smoke rose from the ground, but as the smoldering fire received the sudden birth of oxygen, a great blaze of flame shot up from the ground. The blaze consumed the lumber of the tower and destroyed the siege engines. The Romans watched in stunned disbelief as the flames consumed their hard labor. Okay, and one last part here, which is a conclusion. Yeah. It's from Torah Club number 6. Torah Club number 6, Chronicles of the Apostles. They go through a lot of material because really all this is the background, the theater behind the early congregation in the book of Acts. And Torah Club 6 is all about the book of Acts. So they go through a lot of the political stuff that we don't know that was behind. So and this section is called Doomed Generation, the Doomed Generation. Christian interpretation often oversimplify the suffering endured by the people of Jerusalem. Traditional Christian interpreters find it difficult to resist the temptation of exploiting the tragedy to support a theological agenda against the Jews. They cite the miseries of the people and devastation of the city as evidence that God had abandoned and rejected the Jewish people as a punishment for rejecting Jesus. Others claim that the people suffered such atrocities because God was avenging the crucifixion of his son. For example, Eusebius says, such was the reward which the Jews received for their wickedness and impiety against the Christ of God. We read not long ago about vows, annulled vows, that a man could annul his wife or daughter's vow if he did it before sundown. Okay, I don't want to get into the ethical things of it. Oh, well, why should a man be able to do that? That's not what I want to talk about. But the thing is that some people say, yeah, that was punishment. You remember they said, may his blood be upon us and our children. Ha ha! It happened just as they said. Oh, but something happened between this and that. On the cross, Yeshua annulled as the bridegroom of the bride. He annulled the vow. He said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they do. He annulled the vow. God did not abandon the Jewish people, nor did he seek vengeance against an entire nation for the evil misdeeds of a few wicked men. God, remember, the text tells us it's the Sadducee Judean leaders who didn't like him, who wanted him dead. The Pharisees actually, they may have theological differences, but they didn't want him dead. And except a few radicals, of course. And the majority of the people loved him. The common people loved him. They followed him everywhere. The destruction that befell the nation was brought about by the sins of the nation. Moses had foretold that all these things and more would come upon the Jewish people if they failed to observe all the commandments and his statutes. There was lots of sins going on, hypocrisy, and in Jewish stories they say the first temple was destroyed because of idolatry, but Jews, they don't say, Jews, they know, they say that the temple was destroyed because of hatred without a cause, unwarranted hatred, people, a lack of love between people. And it's funny because it's also something that Paul, I think he warns Timothy about. He says, at the end of days, the love of many will grow cold. It's really important. Now, if we want to know what love is, God's love is, we read 1 Corinthians 13. About patience, long suffering. When we're not like that, we don't have love. And the love of many shall grow cold. That's a sign of God is ready to punish us. Not because we have some wrong theology or wrong doctrinal thing. No, that's what causes anger from God. When his congregation, his people who are made in his image, and the people who call his name are not able to do the very basic thing that he lives for, to love each other. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. It says that he loved us. So we ought to love one another. Without that, we're doomed. Like I always say, we better hang together. If not, we're going to surely hang separately. Though God is patient and long-suffering, he stores up his wrath for a day of reckoning. After many long centuries, that day of reckoning had arrived. This explains why our Master Yeshua urgently called his generation to repentance. And I think our generation is called for repentance. And not about doctrine and theology, but our attitude, the lack of love, the indifference. I heard somebody say one time, the opposite of love is not hatred, it's indifference. He hoped to reverse the judgment against the nation, snatch them back from exile, bring them into the Messianic era. He went out preaching, repent, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. He was hoping it would not happen. Which means quit sinning, turn back to Torah, because the opportunity to enter the Messianic era is here now. Our Master Yeshua warned the generation about the terrible doom that hung over them. He earnestly sought after the wayward sheep of Israel who had wandered into secularism and sin. Secularism, worldliness. Yeshua said, you cannot serve God and mammon. Mammon is materialism. Calling on them to repent, to turn back to Torah and avert the impending disaster. A narrow reading of the Gospels sometimes gives people the impression that the wicked generation of whom the Master spoke were primarily Pharisees and religious Jews. On the contrary, Yeshua considered the Pharisees and the religious Jews and the religious as healthy and righteous. Oh, what? There is a verse a passage that says, talks about, people ask Yeshua, why is he connecting with all the publicans and tax collectors and riffraff? He says, I didn't come to save the healthy, the religious guy, but the sick. It's like, wow, they knew. So Yeshua considered the Pharisees and the religious, the healthy and the righteous. Although he upbraided the Pharisees for religious pretense and hypocrisy, he did not criticize them for their devotion. He actually said, whatever they say, do. Just don't follow their bad example because they don't walk their talk. But whatever they say, do. He said that. He sought after sinners tax collectors, thieves, harlots, wealthy moneylenders, zealot terrorists, and secular Jews who had turned away from the way of Torah. Instead of destruction, the master's generation might have chosen the path of repentance. Instead of exile, they might have chosen the kingdom. Yeshua said, if you had known that in this day, even you, the things which made for peace, but now they have been hidden from your eyes. He warned them, this generation is a wicked generation. And he said, I say to you that it will be more tolerable for the land of Sodom in the day of judgment than for you. The words of Josephus further confirm the master's condemnation of that wicked generation. Josephus says, never did any age since the beginning of the world ever breed a generation more fruitful in wickedness than this one. So that it's funny because if you read all the texts, it tells you there was a lot of religious observance, and there was, but there is both. Very high religious observance can be easily mistaken with, can be easily be out of context with what the relationship God wants us to have with each other, and become hypocritical. If the Romans had delayed, Josephus also says, if the Romans had delayed in coming against those villains any longer, the city would have either been swallowed up by the ground opening upon them, or washed away by water, or destroyed by the thunder that destroyed the land of Sodom. He's going back into Jewish history for this imagery. For the city had brought forth a generation of men much more atheistic than those who suffered such punishment. It was by their madness that all the people came to be killed. So those people were also religious zealots, but they were wicked. These people who took religion and turned it into a political agenda to turn against people whom they didn't like. It's wicked. It's wicked to do that. Despite all this, the generation that saw the destruction. Now, this is back to Torah. Despite all this, the generation that saw the destruction of the temple was not more uniquely wicked than any other generation. The zealots, bandits, and religious fanatics responsible for the sacrilege and fratricide within the holy city were not unlike the zealots, bandits, and godless religious fanatics of later generations, who believed that in the midst of violence, corruption, and massacres, they served God's best interest. People who believed that in the midst of violence, corruption, and massacres, they served God's best interests. The apostolic generation was not worse than those before them, nor were they worse than those that came after them, and not worse than ours. So he's trying to make the point that, hey, we know better, and it was just a juncture of history also. They suffered so exceptionally because they had the misfortune to live at a prophetic juncture in the story of Israel, and they missed their opportunity. A critical moment in history passed them by. Luke 19:44 says, they will level you to the ground and your children within you. They will not live in you one stone upon another, because you did not recognize the time of your visitation. Would our own generation fared any better? That's a really big question. That's a that's an awesome question. Then there is a little Talmudic quote that says, a generation in which the temple is not built is considered to be one in which it was destroyed. So, of course. Okay, I'm going to get up and get this. So, you ready for a little video clip? Not too long, 15 minutes. 15. You hear it? Oh, speak up.
In the spring of the year 70 CE, Titus marches his legions from the coastal plain to Jerusalem. He's boiling with anger. It has been 4 years, and the Roman army has not succeeded in suppressing the stubborn revolt that broke out in Judea. The Jews fight courageously for every piece of land. Even the esteemed commander Vespasian, Titus' father, could not defeat them. Now, after his father's appointment to emperor, it's Titus' turn to manage the campaign. He commands the most powerful war machine in the world, tens of thousands of trained legionnaires, equipped with advanced weapons, sophisticated breaching tools, and lethal artillery. Against the mighty Roman army stands a small force of fighters who will fight for their freedom until their last drop of blood. The final battle of the Great Revolt against Rome begins. It will be a battle that will never be forgotten. In the dark of night, Titus brings up his soldiers from 3 directions to Jerusalem. As dawn breaks on the 14th of Nisan, the eve of Passover, the residents of Jerusalem awaken to a sight that makes their blood run cold. 60,000 Roman soldiers, thirsty for war, surrounded the city from every direction. Only now, when the Romans stand at the gates of the city, does the tragedy caused by the civil war raging in the city become clear. In clashes between the various factions, whole sections of Jerusalem were destroyed. Stores of food that could have provided vital provisions during the fighting and siege went up in flames and vanished. Too late, the rebels joined forces against the true enemy. What they lack in weaponry and soldiers will be reinforced by acts of bravery and unrestrained daring. The Jews take the initiative and respond quickly. They attack ferociously before the Romans take up positions. The surprised Romans scatter in all directions. Titus himself escapes by the skin of his teeth. Before the Romans manage to recover, the Jews retreat behind the mighty defenses of the walls of Jerusalem. These walls are Titus' main problem. Jerusalem is built on a hill and surrounded by 3 fortified walls, each stronger than the other. To breach such a wall, Titus must raise huge earthen ramps and bring up siege towers and battering rams to reach it. In excavations conducted in Jerusalem, in the Russian compound, remains of the third wall have been found. It is the outer wall of the ancient city. We have here testimony to the battle. We found more than 70 catapult stones right here at the front of the wall, so that we know a battle took place here. The number and density of the catapult stones and their locations are basically the testimony that there was a battle here during the Roman period, dated according to the potsherds. The evidence enabled us to conclude that we are dealing with a section of the third wall through which the Romans penetrated Jerusalem. With these huge catapult stones, Titus' soldiers bombarded the Jewish defenders, thus ensuring that they would not disturb the builds of the ramping. Each of these stones weighs about 26 kilograms and flew at a speed of tens of kilometers per hour. When a stone like this crashed into the wall, it was better not to be there. Under heavy artillery cover, the iron rams climbed to the top of the wall and pierced it. The noise is deafening. The largest battering ram of all, nicknamed Nikon, the victor, was the first to breach the wall. The Roman soldiers burst into Beit Zeta neighborhood. They slaughtered the residents without mercy and set the entire neighborhood on fire. Within a few days, the second wall also falls. The Jewish defenses begin to disintegrate. Titus renews the attack and advances his soldiers to the internal wall, the strongest wall of Jerusalem, known as the First Wall. He concentrates most of his efforts here at the Antonia fortress. The Antonia is the largest, strongest fortress in Jerusalem. It was built by Herod to the north of the Temple Mount in order to control the temple. Titus' plan was well thought out. The moment the Antonia falls, the temple will fall. And when the temple falls, the Jews lose all hope, and Jerusalem will finally fall into his hands. But nothing prepared him for what happens next. In a daring action, the soldiers of John of Giscala succeed in digging a tunnel under the earthen ramp opposite the Antonia, setting fire to its foundations and toppling it together with the soldiers to the ground.
Sound effects for the taking over of the country. So it was all planned.
At the same time, Simon Bar Giora attacks the ramp opposite the first wall and sets it on fire. Hundreds of Roman soldiers are killed and wounded. All at once, the Roman attack is halted, and the entire Roman army is driven out of the city. Stunned by the failure, Titus gathers his commanders urgently and decides to change tactics. If it is not possible to break into the city, he will surround it from within and stone the leaders to death. In a record time of only 3 days, Titus brings up a giant siege around Jerusalem, a chokehold 7 kilometers long that effectively blocks out all supply lines. Now, starvation sets in to cruelly destroy the city. Affluent people scour the guards to find scraps of food, and small children whose parents have starved to death wander the streets in search of a piece of bread. The tension in the city grows. Those who are left with a little food begin to seek it. Others try to evade the zealots and escape from the city. Most of those who try to flee are caught by the Romans and crucified on wooden beams around the city walls. Fatigue and starvation weaken the Jewish fighters. This is Titus' chance to deal the crushing blow to Jerusalem. The Roman army is concentrated on one task: to conquer Antonia fortress and break through to the temple. The Jews tried to prevent the capture of the Temple Mount and sabotage the building of the ramps. They shot flaming arrows, threw giant stones, and poured boiling oil on the head of the Roman soldiers. In the Temple Mount sifting project, iron arrowheads were found. These arrowheads
Should be more.
were used for catapult fire. Catapults are machines for shooting arrows, and they bombarded the walls with such force that even the bravest of the Jewish fighters could not withstand. After fierce battles, Titus' soldiers gained control of the Antonia. On the 17th of Tammuz, Titus commands them to destroy the mighty citadel down to its foundations. This day, on which according to tradition the city was breached, is commemorated as a day of mourning on the Jewish calendar. The temple service ceased completely, and during the following 3 weeks, the days between the straits, the Jews would struggle in bloody face-to-face battles in the courtyards of God's temple. The battering rams breached the western walls of the Temple Mount. Ladders are leaned against the remains of the wall, and the Roman soldiers stream in mass into the temple courtyard. It seems that the campaign is drawing to a close, but what happens next is totally inconceivable. When the Jews realize that the temple is in real danger, they shake off all feelings of hunger and weakness. Thousands of citizens, women, men, elders, youth, everyone who can hold a weapon, join the warriors. Together, as one man, they fall upon the Romans, block the way to the temple with their body. Only one weapon can beat the fire of faith that burns in the hearts of the Jewish fighters, the burning fire of torches. And thus, on the night of the 9th of Av, Titus sets fire to the gates that surround the Temple Mount. On their way to the temple, the Romans burst through, killing, stabbing, and trampling everyone in their path. The blood flows on the colorful stone floors of the Temple Mount as bodies of the slain pile high. The flames quickly spread and approach the entrance to the temple. A moment before it goes up in flames, Titus gathers his commanders for a final consultation to determine the fate of the temple. Josephus claims that Titus opposed doing the temple, which in his eyes was the glory of human creation. According to Josephus, the fire was caused by accident by a Roman soldier who inadvertently tossed a burning torch into the sanctuary. But most scholars do not believe this is really true. The anger over the many casualties caused by the Jews and the understanding that as long as the temple stood, the Jews would continue to fight, decided the temple's fate. Let them see and fear. On the 9th of Av, towards evening, Titus gave the order, and the following day, the 10th of Av, his soldiers set fire to the sanctuary. The temple that had been the source of inspiration, faith, ethics, and righteousness for the Jewish people and all humanity for centuries, now went up in flames. The cries of pain of the Jews rose up to the heavens. Titus commands the burning of the lower city. In the upper city, the rebels continue to fight stubbornly for another month, until the Romans take control of it too, and set it ablaze. The charred remains of fire and destruction, discovered by Professor Nachman of God in what was once an opulent neighborhood, tell the story of the complete destruction of Jerusalem. Chilling testimony to the last moments of the city is found here, between layers of ruins and ashes. The severed arm of a young woman with a spear alongside it. It appears that she too was unable to escape to the rebels' final refuge, the underground drainage channel. We're inside the drainage channel, where the rebels hid 2,000 years ago. The last of the Jerusalem residents hid in this tunnel, here, where we stand. Suffocating darkness and terrible fear surrounded them. The Romans searched for them, found them, broke through the ceiling of the tunnel, and killed everyone. Among the finds discovered here that testified to the horror was this Roman sword, the Roman gladius, found on the tunnel floor. Nearby were cooking pots, clay lamps, and coins of the revolt, with the Hebrew words, Herut Zion, freedom for Zion. 2 words that expressed the heartfelt aspiration of the Jews who hid and were killed here in the drainage channel in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. It is possible that the death of these people in the depths of the ground was preferable to the horrors suffered by their brethren who were taken captive. The prisoners were sold into lifelong slavery or died in blood sport, fighting against wild animals and gladiators. In pain, shock, and sorrow, the Jewish prisoners are marched through the streets of Rome, and before them go the spoils of war from Jerusalem, the golden menorah, and the holy vessels of the temple. Rome celebrates its victory.
This ark is actually in Rome. It's called Titus's Arch, and all the little depictions inside are about the victory that over Jerusalem, and it shows people carrying the golden menorah and all that. A few years ago, maybe 20 years ago, a young Israeli who was on holiday in Rome got up the ark and wrote in Hebrew, Am Yisrael Chai, Israel lives on. I don't know if they kept it, but
The parade, with huge monuments and a special coin that glorifies and commemorates the suppression of Judea. Jerusalem, weeping and mourning, descends under layers of ash and destruction. After 5 years of persistent struggle against the strongest empire of the world, the Second Temple is destroyed.
There's a couple of prophecies. It's called Midrash, where people imagine Moses ask questions. And in one of this questions, it says that God took the temple so he would not destroy the people. This one in the Jewish writings. And there's another one when Moses, he gets this prophecy, they're going to sin and they're going to go in exile. And Moses asked the question, and this is in the Talmud, okay? Moses asked the question. Somebody imagines this sort of dialogue going on between Moses and God. Moses asked the question. So this temple is your connection with the people. What happens on the day that temple is taken? You're saying everything's gonna. What happens? And the answers in Jewish writing is, on that day, I will take one of their righteous people as a ransom in exchange for to be the sense of connection. And that's, we know who that righteous person is. Now, one last thing. If you read the dedication of the temple that Solomon built in 1 Kings 8, it's beautiful. It says, when your people pray towards this place, please answer their prayer. That's why Jews, for example, who live here, they turn east. If you live in Iraq or Saudi Arabia, you turn west, turning towards Jerusalem. But in that dedication, it also says, Solomon also prays, when anybody in the world, Jew or non-Jew, prays toward this place, please answer their prayer. This is what Jeremiah called it, the house of prayer for all people, not just for the Jews. So the Romans and the Jews destroyed their own house. It was a house, universal house of connection with God, which right now we have that connection through Yeshua. So, Abba Father, we thank you that we can remember these things. Help us to really take to heart these things that we pondered about today. Would our generation fare better? Do we have some of the same earmarks from that generation? Help us to not look at it as history, but know that this history was written as an example unto us who come toward the end of the age. B'Shem Yeshua Mashiach, Amen.